I never thought I'd be the one fighting for my place at Brighton Media. When I joined the marketing team 5 years ago, fresh out of graduate school with ideas that made even the veterans take notes, I believed my trajectory was set. I'd rise through the ranks on merit alone. My creativity would speak for itself. My first campaign for Eastern Coast Airlines exceeded projections by 37%. I remember the congratulatory emails, the nods of approval in the hallway, my name mentioned in quarterly reports. I became known as the person who could rescue failing client relationships, who could see angles others missed. My colleagues started coming to me before approaching our director. I stayed late, came in early, and missed enough family gatherings that my mother stopped asking if I'd attend. "You're exactly what this agency needed," Director Harmon told me during my second-year review, sliding a modest but satisfying raise letter across his desk. "Keep this up, and we'll be talking about team leadership next year." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Brighton had always prided itself on recognizing talent. The walls were adorned with framed success stories, campaigns that had changed public perception, launched unknown products into household names. I wanted my work among them. When Rachel joined our team last year, I welcomed her. She came from a boutique agency in New York with impressive credentials and a portfolio that made me genuinely excited to collaborate. We worked well together at first, our strengths complementary. While I excelled at strategy and client communication, she brought fresh design sensibilities that elevated our pitches. We became the unofficial power duo for high-stakes presentations. I noticed the shift during the Westlake Pharmaceuticals pitch. Rachel suggested a completely different approach the night before our presentation, a risky, bold concept that contradicted weeks of research. I voiced my concerns, citing data that indicated potential regulatory issues. "Sometimes you have to trust instinct over spreadsheets," she said with a confidence I both admired and found unsettling. "This is what will make them remember us." Director Harmon sided with her despite my objections. We stayed until midnight revising everything. The next day, the client loved it. Their CEO called it refreshingly bold. I smiled through the congratulations, even as I noted that my contributions to the original strategy went unmentioned. After that, meetings changed. Rachel was invited to client dinners. I wasn't. My emails about campaign metrics received delayed responses, while her creative suggestions got immediate attention. Nothing dramatic, just small omissions that formed a pattern only I seemed to notice. The North Star Hotels project became my proving ground. I worked tirelessly on a comprehensive rebrand strategy, interviewing former guests, analyzing competitor positioning, identifying unique selling points that had been overlooked. When presentation day arrived, I was prepared to remind everyone why I had once been considered indispensable. I walked into the conference room to find Rachel already there with Director Harmon, my presentation open on her laptop. "We've made some adjustments," Harmon said, barely looking up. "Rachel will lead today. You'll handle the analytics portion." I felt my face flush as I flipped through the revised deck. My strategy remained largely intact, but the narrative had changed. My voice had been replaced. In that moment, I understood with painful clarity that I was becoming invisible at the company I had helped build. As Rachel began speaking, commanding the room with practiced ease, I watched our clients nod in appreciation at insights I had uncovered, strategies I had developed. Yet their eyes were fixed on her, not me. I had become the research behind someone else's vision, the foundation without recognition. That night I stayed late again, the office empty except for the cleaning staff. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window, surrounded by the glittering city lights, and asked myself what I was really fighting for, the work I believed in, or the recognition I thought I deserved. I wasn't sure I knew the answer anymore. The annual company retreat in Vermont should have been my opportunity to reconnect with leadership, to remind them of my value beyond the numbers I produced. I packed my best casual clothes and prepared talking points for the inevitable fireside conversations where real decisions were made. This year would be different. I would make sure of it. The resort was nestled among maple trees just beginning to show hints of autumn color. In another context, I might have appreciated the rustic elegance, the stone fireplaces and wooden beams. Instead, I found myself analyzing every conversation, calculating my position in the shifting social landscape of Brighton Media. Great work on North Star, Managing partner William Ellis said, clapping my shoulder during the welcome dinner. That demographic analysis was exactly what they needed to hear. I opened my mouth to elaborate on my full contribution when Rachel appeared at his side, champagne flute in hand. "We took quite a risk with the brand voice repositioning," she said, smiling warmly at me before turning to William. "But sometimes the data points you in unexpected directions." William nodded appreciatively. "That's the Brighton approach. Solid research informing bold creative." He raised his glass. 2 successful partnerships. The irony wasn't lost on me. On paper, Rachel and I were equals, both senior strategists with similar years of experience. Yet somehow she had crossed an invisible boundary into the inner circle while I remained on the periphery, my face pressed against the glass. The next morning I arrived early to the strategy workshop, determined to establish my presence. I claimed a seat near the head of the table and prepared my notes for the brainstorming session. One by one, colleagues filtered in, filling the room with casual conversation about dinner the previous night and the morning hike some had taken before breakfast. Director Harmon arrived last, followed closely by Rachel and William. They were laughing about something, an inside joke I wasn't privy to. The seating arrangement shifted as people made room for them. I found myself moved 3 spaces down, now positioned between junior team members instead of leadership. "Let's talk about where we want to be this time next year," Harmon began, scanning the room. His gaze passed over me without pause. "Rachel, would you mind sharing some thoughts on the creative direction you've been exploring for our agency branding?" I watched as Rachel stood, seemingly unprepared yet perfectly poised. She spoke eloquently about Brighton's evolution, about maintaining our core values while embracing more daring approaches. Every point she made could have come from conversations we'd had together, ideas we'd developed jointly over late-night sessions and weekend emails. I raised my hand during the discussion period, waiting to be acknowledged. When finally called on, I kept my voice steady. "I think we're missing an opportunity to better integrate data insights with creative execution," I said, addressing the entire room, but watching Harmon. "Our clients consistently praise our strategic foundations. We could strengthen our position by demonstrating how our creative risks are actually calculated decisions based on deep market understanding." The room fell silent for a moment. Harmon glanced at William, who gave a small nod. "That's worth exploring," Harmon said finally. "Maybe you could work with the analytics team to develop a case study on that approach." The analytics team, not creative, not strategy. I was being pigeonholed. My broader contributions diminished to a technical specialty. During the afternoon break, I found myself alone on the terrace overlooking the mountains. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find Maria, our operations director, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing me one. "Workshops can be draining." Maria had been with Brighton longer than almost anyone. She'd seen people rise and fall, departments restructure, priorities shift with market trends. If anyone understood the unwritten rules of advancement, it was her. "Can I ask you something?" I said after a moment. "Have I changed, or has Brighton?" Maria considered the question, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Both, probably. This industry rewards certain qualities that may have nothing to do with the quality of your work. Qualities like what Rachel has," I said, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. "Rachel knows how to make people feel like they're the most important person in the room when she's talking to them," Maria replied carefully. "She's mastered the art of visibility without seeming to seek it. But that doesn't mean your approach isn't valuable." "Valuable but increasingly overlooked," I countered. Maria turned to face me directly. "The question isn't whether you're being overlooked. The question is whether you still believe in what you're doing, regardless of who gets the credit. And if you don't, if recognition matters more than the work itself, then maybe it's time to reevaluate what you really want." Her words struck deeper than she probably intended. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the terrace, I realized I stood at a crossroads that had been forming beneath my feet for months. I could continue fighting for recognition within a system that increasingly marginalized my contributions, or I could find the courage to imagine a different path entirely. The Callister pitch was supposed to be routine, a mid-sized sporting goods company looking to refresh their brand before expanding into international markets. the kind of client Brighton had handled dozens of times before. What made it different was the directive that came with the brief. The CEO wanted something revolutionary, not evolutionary. It was precisely the kind of challenge I once lived for. I spent weeks developing a comprehensive strategy, interviewing their customers, analyzing international competitors, identifying white space in the market. I created a narrative that positioned Callister not just as a sporting goods brand, but as an advocate for everyday athleticism, celebrating the weekend warrior alongside the professional. The data supported every element of my strategy. For the first time in months, I felt confident in my contribution. 2 days before the presentation, I received an email from Director Harmon. The subject line read simply, "Callister Team Adjustment. Given the creative emphasis of this pitch, Rachel will be taking the lead. Please forward your research and strategic framework to her by end of day. You'll handle the competitive analysis section during the presentation." My hands trembled as I read the message. This wasn't just another slight. This was the systematic erasure of my role. I had originated the pitch, developed the strategy, built relationships with the client during preliminary meetings. Now I was being reduced to a supporting player in my own production. I closed my laptop and walked to the bathroom, locking myself in a stall until I could breathe normally again. When I returned to my desk, Rachel was waiting. "I just got Harmon's email," she said, her expression a practiced mix of sympathy and professional distance. "I wanted to check in. I know you've put a lot into this pitch." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. Was she complicit in this gradual sidelining, or merely benefiting from it? Did the distinction even matter? "You know, Rachel, I've been trying to figure out what changed," I said, keeping my voice low despite the anger simmering beneath my words. "When we started working together, we were collaborators. Now every project we touch becomes yours, regardless of who initiated it or who did the foundational work." Her expression shifted, surprise mingled with something harder to identify. "That's not how I see it. We're still a team. My name might be listed first on some presentations, but everyone knows we share the work." "Do they? Because from where I'm sitting, credit seems to flow in only one direction lately." She glanced around, aware that our conversation was attracting attention despite our hushed tones. "This isn't the place. We should talk about this properly. Maybe grab dinner after work?" "There's nothing to discuss," I replied, surprised by my own certainty. "I'll send you my materials within the hour." That night, I stayed late again, watching the cleaning staff vacuum around my desk as I stared at my computer screen. I wasn't really working, just avoiding going home to an empty apartment where I'd replay the day's humiliations without the buffer of professional pretense. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex, a former Brighton colleague who had left to start his own consultancy last year. "Heard about the Callister situation? Harmon pulled the same thing with me before I left. Coffee tomorrow?" I agreed to meet him, more out of exhaustion than genuine interest. What advice could he possibly offer that would change my reality at Brighton? The next morning, I sat through the pitch prep meeting in silence, watching Rachel present my strategy as if she had conceived it herself. She had added visual elements that admittedly enhanced the narrative, but the core, the insight that made the approach compelling, remained mine. Not that anyone acknowledged it. "This is exactly the bold direction Callister is looking for," Harmon said, nodding approvingly. "Great work, Rachel." I felt something shift inside me then, a small tear in the fabric of my professional identity. I had defined myself by my work at Brighton, by the value I added, by the recognition I expected that work to garner. What happened when that recognition was systematically denied? Who was I then? After the meeting, I met Alex at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office. He looked different, more relaxed, more himself somehow. "You look terrible," he said by way of greeting, sliding a cappuccino toward me. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," I replied, managing a small smile despite myself. "Brighton will do that to you," he said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "They cultivate dependence. They make you believe your value is tied to their validation. It's by design." I wanted to disagree, to defend the company I had given so much to, but the words wouldn't come. So what's the alternative? Start over somewhere else only to face the same politics with different players? Alex leaned forward, his expression surprisingly earnest. What if the problem isn't you or even Rachel? What if it's the entire structure? This idea that we have to compete for recognition rather than collaborating toward shared goals? Sounds idealistic, I said, though something in his words resonated with a long-buried part of me. Maybe, but my consultancy is built on that exact principle: transparent contribution, shared credit, collective investment in outcomes. We're small, but we're growing, and we're looking for someone with exactly your skills. I stared at him, the implication of his words slowly dawning on me. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, he corrected. Equal standing, equal voice, equal stake in the business. No more fighting to be seen. As he outlined the opportunity, I felt that internal tear widen. It wasn't just about leaving Brighton. It was about leaving behind a mindset that had shaped my professional identity for years. Could I really walk away from the prestige, the client roster, the resources? Could I trade certainty, however painful, for the unknown? The Callister presentation was scheduled for that afternoon. I had an hour to decide who I would be when I walked into that room, a supporting player in someone else's narrative or the author of my own. I stood in the restroom, 15 minutes before the Callister presentation, staring at my reflection. The face looking back at me seemed foreign somehow, too composed, too professional, masking the turmoil beneath. I straightened my navy blazer, adjusted my collar, and practiced the smile I would wear while watching Rachel present my work. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Alex. Whatever you decide, remember your worth isn't determined by Brighton. I slipped the phone back into my pocket as the door swung open. Rachel entered, her expression tense despite her immaculate appearance. There you are, she said, relief evident in her voice. Harmon's looking for you. The Callister team just arrived early. I nodded, maintaining the professional facade that had become second nature. I'll be right there. Rachel hesitated, her hand still on the door. Listen, about yesterday, I never intended to take credit for your strategy. The positioning is brilliant, and I've made it clear to everyone that the foundation came from you. Her words should have offered comfort, but they only deepened my resolve. I didn't want attribution buried in meeting minutes or acknowledged in hushed conversations. I wanted the opportunity to present my own vision, to defend it, to see it implemented as I had conceived it. We should get in there, I said, moving past her toward the door. The Callister team was already seated in the conference room when we arrived. 4 executives in varying shades of business casual, their expressions expectant. Director Harmon was making small talk about local restaurants, while William arranged presentation materials at the head of the table. Ah, perfect timing, Harmon said, noticing our entrance. Everyone's here now. Let's begin. I took my assigned seat, presentation notes arranged neatly before me. As Rachel began her introduction, I found myself strangely detached from the proceedings, as if watching from a distance. The strategy I had poured weeks into now felt like someone else's creation, something I had once been passionate about but could no longer fully claim. Rachel was halfway through the brand positioning segment when something shifted in the room. The Callister CEO, James Callister himself, was frowning slightly, his attention drifting. The marketing director beside him whispered something, and he nodded in response. This is certainly a polished approach, James interrupted, his tone measured but unconvinced. But I'm not hearing anything revolutionary. This feels like the same brand story with updated visuals. Rachel faltered momentarily before regaining her composure. The revolution is in the execution, not just the narrative. If you'll allow me to continue to the implementation phase. We've seen plenty of beautiful executions, the marketing director cut in. What we haven't seen is a fundamental rethinking of who Callister is to our customers. Your preliminary discussion suggested something bolder. A heavy silence fell over the room. Rachel glanced at Harmon, who cleared his throat uncomfortably. I felt their collective uncertainty, the slight panic that accompanies a pitch going sideways. In that moment, something crystallized within me. Without fully processing the implications, I found myself speaking. If I may, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. There's an element of the strategy we haven't highlighted yet. All eyes turned to me. Harmon's expression was a mixture of surprise and warning, but I continued. The research revealed something unexpected about Callister's position in the market. Your customers don't see you primarily as a provider of sporting goods. They see you as enablers of personal achievement. The connection they feel to your brand isn't about the products themselves, but about what those products allow them to accomplish. James Callister leaned forward, his interest visibly rekindled. Go on. I stood, moving toward the presentation screen where Rachel's carefully designed slides still displayed. The revolutionary approach isn't in changing your brand story. It's in acknowledging that you're not just in the sporting goods business. You're in the business of personal transformation. For the next 15 minutes, I spoke without slides, without rehearsed talking points, drawing directly from the research I had conducted and the insights I had initially developed. I laid out a vision for Callister that transcended product categories and spoke to deeper customer motivations, achievement, personal growth, community connection. When I finished, the room was silent again, but with a different quality, anticipation rather than awkwardness. James Callister was the first to speak. That, he said emphatically, is what we came here to hear. The mood in the room shifted dramatically. The Callister team began asking specific questions about implementation, timeline, measurement. I answered some, directed others to Rachel or Harmon, functioning as part of the team while simultaneously standing apart from it. As the meeting concluded, handshakes were exchanged, promises of follow-up communications made. James Callister stopped beside me on his way out. Your perspective was exactly what we needed, he said. I'd like you to be our primary contact on this project moving forward. I nodded, thanking him professionally while acutely aware of Harmon's gaze from across the room. Once the Callister team had departed, the false unity that had carried us through the presentation dissolved. That was quite a performance, Harmon said, his tone carefully neutral. Unorthodox, but effective. It was what the client needed to hear, I replied simply. Rachel approached, her expression complex. You were right, she said quietly. That positioning was always yours. I should have insisted on proper attribution from the beginning. William cleared his throat from the doorway. Whatever the attribution, we have a new client because of what happened in this room today. Let's discuss how we move forward from here. As they talked about next steps in account management, I felt strangely removed from the conversation. My decision had been made the moment I stood up and reclaimed my voice. It wasn't about the Callister account or even about recognition anymore. It was about integrity, to my work, to my vision, to myself. When the post-mortem finally concluded, I declined the celebratory drinks at the bar across the street. Instead, I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and composed 2 emails. One to Alex accepting his offer, and one to HR requesting a meeting the following morning. By the time I shut down my computer, the office was empty. I gathered a few personal items from my desk. A coffee mug, a notebook, a small plant I had somehow kept alive for 3 years. Everything else could wait until after my official resignation. As I waited for the elevator, I felt a surprising absence of regret or anxiety. There was only a quiet certainty that I had, at last, chosen to value myself in the way I had always wanted Brighton to value me. News of my resignation spread through Brighton media with surprising speed. By mid-morning, my inbox filled with messages ranging from perfunctory well-wishes to genuine expressions of shock. My meeting with HR had been brief but cordial. I emphasized that my departure was about new opportunities rather than grievances, though the knowing look in the HR director's eyes suggested she understood more than I articulated. Director Harmon requested a private meeting once the paperwork was initiated. He closed his office door and gestured to the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I had once received praise and promises of advancement. I wish you had come to me before making this decision, he said, leaning back in his chair. There might have been other solutions. Such as? I couldn't help asking. He spread his hands in a conciliatory gesture. A different team assignment, a more clearly defined role, perhaps even a title adjustment to reflect your contributions more accurately. The offer might have tempted me months ago, the formal recognition I had been seeking packaged as a compromise. Now it felt hollow, a reactive concession rather than a genuine valuation of my work. I appreciate that, but my decision is made, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. The partnership with Alex offers me something Brighton can't. Equal standing, Harmon said, nodding slightly. I understand the appeal, but startups are risky. We both know the statistics on new consultancies, especially in this market. Sometimes security isn't worth the cost, I said, surprised by my own conviction. He studied me for a moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in months. Yesterday's presentation, that was impressive. Unplanned, off script, but exactly what the client needed. It reminded me why we hired you. The irony wasn't lost on me. My most authentic professional moment at Brighton had come only after I had mentally resigned, after I had stopped striving for approval within their system. The Callister account, Harmon continued, they've specifically requested you stay involved through the transition. We'd be willing to arrange a consulting contract for the first 3 months after your departure. Generous terms, of course. The proposal was unexpected. A consulting arrangement would provide financial buffer during the transition to Alex's firm, while allowing me to see the Callister strategy through its initial implementation. From a practical perspective, it made sense. I'll consider it, I said, standing to signal the end of our conversation. Send over the terms and I'll discuss it with Alex. As I turned to leave, Harmon called after me. For what it's worth, you were never invisible here. Perhaps not spotlighted the way you deserved, but valued nonetheless. I nodded without turning back, unwilling to engage in a rewriting of history that served only to ease his conscience. The remainder of my 2-week notice period unfolded with a strange mix of detachment and intense presence. Freed from concern about advancement or recognition, I found myself more engaged with the actual work than I had been in months. I documented processes, transferred knowledge, prepared detailed briefings for whoever would inherit my accounts. The professional ethic that had defined my career wouldn't allow for anything less, regardless of my feelings about Brighton. Rachel and I maintained a carefully cordial relationship during this transition. We spoke only of work, never about the undercurrents that had shaped our professional rivalry. But as my final day approached, she appeared at my desk as I was packing the last of my belongings. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. Not for advancing my career, but for doing it at the expense of yours. I paused, a framed certificate halfway into my cardboard box. Were you even aware of doing it? She considered the question with surprising candor. Not at first. Later. Yes, to some extent. It's easy to accept advantage when it's offered. Harder to question why it's being offered to you and not someone else. Her admission was more than I had expected. There was no point in recrimination now, no satisfaction to be gained from lingering resentment. Brighton's culture encourages that kind of competition, I said finally. Maybe neither of us is entirely to blame. Will you be working with Callister at your new firm? She asked, changing the subject. No. I've agreed to consult on the transition, but the account stays with Brighton. Harmon will assign someone new as primary contact. It should have been your account from the beginning, she said quietly. I closed my box and stood, surveying the empty desk that had been my professional home for 5 years. It doesn't matter now. As I carried my belongings through the open office, I received handshakes, hugs, and promises to stay in touch that we both knew would likely go unfulfilled. The performative nature of these goodbyes struck me as emblematic of my entire Brighton experience. Authentic human connections filtered through professional constraints. William Ellis stopped me at the elevator, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. Brighton will be lesser without you, he said, shaking my hand firmly. But perhaps we never deserved you in the first place. The admission, coming from someone at his level, might once have been validation enough to make me reconsider. Now it was simply confirmation that I had made the right choice. That evening, Alex and I met at his office, a converted industrial space in the East Side Arts District, its exposed brick and open floor plan a stark contrast to Brighton's corporate polish. 3 other team members were there, each with their own story of corporate disillusionment and creative rebirth. To new beginnings, Alex said, raising a glass of champagne as we gathered around a reclaimed wood table that served as their conference space. We spent hours discussing vision, approach, potential clients. The conversation flowed without hierarchy, ideas evaluated on merit rather than source. By midnight, we had mapped out our first quarter strategy on a whiteboard spanning an entire wall. Walking to my car afterward, the city quiet around me, I felt a sense of alignment I hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new uncertainties, new opportunities to question my decision. But tonight, Watching my breath form clouds in the cold night air, I was certain of one thing. I had chosen not just a different workplace, but a different way of working, one that honored the voice I had nearly lost. 6 months passed in a blur of 18-hour days, makeshift client presentations, and the particular brand of chaos that accompanies any new venture. We called ourselves Prism Collective, a name that reflected our commitment to revealing the full spectrum of possibilities in every client engagement. Our office evolved from Alex's industrial space to a proper suite, though we maintained the collaborative open plan that had come to define our working style. My consulting arrangement with Brighton concluded after the agreed-upon 3 months. The Callister launch exceeded expectations, establishing a foundation that the Brighton team could build upon without my continued involvement. Director Harmon sent a brief email acknowledging the success and expressing hope that I was finding fulfillment in new endeavors. I responded with professional courtesy, the exchange as much closure as I was likely to receive. At Prism, we secured 4 clients in our first quarter, small to mid-sized companies overlooked by larger agencies but perfectly sized for our boutique approach. Each proposal was developed collectively, each presentation delivered by the person whose expertise best matched the client's needs rather than by title or seniority. The liberation from hierarchical constraints allowed us to operate with a fluidity that larger agencies couldn't match. Then came the opportunity that would define our nascent reputation. Meridian Healthcare, a regional hospital network undergoing rebranding following a merger. Their RFP had been sent to agencies 10 times our size, with portfolios far more extensive than ours. That we had been included at all was remarkable, a result of a board member who had worked with Alex years earlier and believed in his vision for Prism. "They'll never select us," cautioned Elise, our digital strategist who had joined us from a major tech company. "The safe choice would be one of the established agencies." "Then we don't position ourselves as the safe choice," I countered, the strategy already forming in my mind. "We position ourselves as the necessary risk." We spent 2 weeks developing our approach, foregoing sleep and normal working hours as the deadline approached. Unlike my time at Brighton, this exhaustion felt purposeful, driven by collective investment rather than individual striving. Each late night blurred into early morning as we refined, questioned, reimagined, the conference room walls covered with evolving concepts and discarded iterations. The morning of the presentation, I stood before the mirror in my apartment, adjusting the same navy blazer I had worn during my final Brighton pitch. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Another pivotal moment, another opportunity to either claim my professional voice or surrender it to institutional expectations. But this time was different. I wasn't fighting to be heard within a system designed to muffle individual contribution. I was part of creating a new system altogether, one founded on principles of transparent attribution and collective success. The Meridian boardroom was intimidating by design. Leather chairs surrounding a massive mahogany table, hospital executives in formal attire arranged along either side. We were the last of 5 agencies to present that day, a scheduling that could either work to our advantage or leave us competing with presentation fatigue. "Thank you for including Prism in your consideration," Alex began, establishing our presence with quiet confidence. "We recognize that we're the unexpected addition to your shortlist. By the end of this hour, we hope to show you why that unexpected choice might be exactly what Meridian needs." As we moved through our presentation, Alex covering company background, Elise handling digital strategy, Marcos presenting creative directions, I observed the subtle shift in the room's energy. Initial skepticism gave way to genuine interest, then active engagement as board members began asking questions that went beyond perfunctory inquiry. When my segment arrived, the core brand strategy that would unite the merged entities under a cohesive identity, I felt none of the anxiety that had accompanied my Callister intervention. This wasn't a reclamation of stolen recognition. It was the natural expression of work developed through true collaboration. Healthcare branding typically emphasizes either technological advancement or compassionate care. I began, moving to the center of the room. Meridian has the opportunity to transcend that false dichotomy. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined our vision for positioning Meridian not just as a healthcare provider, but as a health partner, an entity that existed within the community rather than adjacent to it. I presented research showing how the merger, perceived initially as corporate consolidation, could be reframed as expanded access to care when properly communicated. The CEO, Dr. Eleanor Winters, had remained largely silent throughout our presentation. As I concluded, she leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Your approach differs significantly from what we've seen today," she said, her tone measured. "The other agencies presented variations on what we expected. Professional, safe, predictable. You're suggesting something else entirely." "We are," I acknowledged, "because Meridian's situation demands it. The merger has created uncertainty in the communities you serve. Conventional healthcare messaging won't address that uncertainty. It will only reinforce the perception of corporate interests superseding patient care." A silence followed, heavy with evaluation. The board members exchanged glances, some nodding slightly, others maintaining careful neutrality. "Your firm," Dr. Winters continued, "is quite new. This would be your largest client by a considerable margin. How can we be confident in your capacity to deliver at the scale we require?" It was the question we had anticipated, the obvious objection to selecting an unproven agency for such a significant project. Alex started to respond with our prepared answer about strategic partnerships and scalable resources, but I found myself interrupting. "You're right to question our capacity," I said, earning a surprised glance from my colleagues. "We don't have the infrastructure of larger agencies. What we offer instead is undivided attention and complete alignment. Your project won't be handed off to junior staff after the pitch. The team you see today is the team you'll work with throughout. We succeed only if you succeed." Dr. Winters held my gaze for a long moment before a small smile altered her composed expression. "Refreshing honesty," she said, then turned to address the entire room. "I believe we have sufficient information to make our decision." We were escorted from the boardroom with professional courtesy, but no indication of the outcome. As we gathered our materials in silence, the tension of anticipation surrounded us like a physical presence. "That was either brilliantly authentic or career suicide," Marcos muttered as we waited for the elevator. "Either way, we stayed true to our principles," Alex replied. "That's the foundation of Prism, win or lose." 2 days later, the call came. Meridian had selected Prism as their agency of record for the rebranding initiative. Their decision cited our innovative approach and transparent communication style as determining factors. That evening, we gathered in our office. No longer just colleagues, but partners in the truest sense. Someone had brought champagne again, an echo of our first night planning the company's future. "To Prism," Alex toasted, raising his glass. "And to each of you for making this possible." As congratulations circulated, I found myself drawn to the window overlooking the city. Somewhere in those lights, Brighton Media continued operating according to its established hierarchies. Rachel was likely advancing, perhaps already occupying the role I had once aspired to. Harmon and William were guiding the agency along familiar paths, perpetuating a system that worked well enough for those who thrived within its constraints. I felt no animosity toward them now, only a quiet gratitude for the lessons learned through that struggle. Without Brighton's limitations, I might never have discovered the courage to help create something different. "Penny, for your thoughts," Alex said, joining me at the window. "Just reflecting on the journey that brought us here," I replied truthfully. He nodded, understanding without further explanation. "The view's different from this side of the glass, isn't it?" It was. The city spread before us not as a landscape of institutional barriers, but as a field of possibilities. In leaving behind the fight for recognition within a flawed system, I had found something more valuable: the freedom to create a system where such fights were unnecessary, where contribution was honored without qualification, where professional fulfillment didn't come at the cost of personal integrity. Tomorrow would bring the real work of the Meridian Project, the practical challenges that no amount of principled intention could eliminate. But tonight, watching my reflection in the darkened glass, now clear and defined rather than faded and uncertain, I knew that whatever challenges arose, I would face them as my authentic professional self, neither diminished by others nor defined by their approval.